Welcome to the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production. For transcriptions, show notes, and extras, please visit us at theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. Now, broadcasting across the world from the heart of the American Bible Belt, here is your host, Michael B. Rush.
Hello, friends. I'm your host, Michael B. Rush, and I welcome you back to the Black Swan Rising podcast. This is episode 4. Last time, we left off at the end of episode 3 talking about Chris Bledsoe's incredible experiences with an entity that he refers to as the lady. Now, according to Chris's experiences with the lady, this lady claims to go by many ancient names: Isis, Ishtar, Hathor, Asherah, Queen of Heaven, Athena, Ianna, Sophia, and so on. You will recall from that episode that the lady told Chris Bledsoe that the world was about to enter into a new stage of the divine feminine, and that stage would begin around Easter of 2026. Now, friends, when you've studied the ancient religions and texts of the world, like I have, a statement like this really makes you nervous, because the entity known as Isis, Ishtar, Hathor, Asherah, Queen of Heaven, there ain't nothing good about this lady. And I want to explain to you some of the history and references from the ancient documents of the world and why those references make me very nervous and hopeful that Chris Bledsoe may just be blowing smoke up our skirts, I hope. Because if this is real, then yikes, friends, we need to buckle up, because we are about to experience some crazy things. So where do we start? Well, like so many other places in this podcast, the place to start in the ancient texts is the book of Enoch. I have spent some time over the course of the prior 3 episodes talking about the relevance of the book of Enoch. And I will continue referencing the book of Enoch throughout this podcast series, because it is, in my opinion, an astounding document that is highly relevant to us in our days. And recall, the opening verses of the book of Enoch explicitly state that Enoch was writing it for those who would be living in the last days, during the days of trial. Friends, that's you and I. So what does the book of Enoch say about the lady? Well, I mentioned that one of the titles that the lady has gone by throughout history is Lady Wisdom. She was almost exclusively known as Lady Wisdom by the Gnostic tradition. Now, this title for Lady Wisdom is also found in the Bible, the Old Testament, in Proverbs chapter 8. We'll get to that. It's very interesting stuff. But I want to start with some verses in the book of Enoch, specifically book of Enoch chapter 42, verses. I'm going to start with verses 1 and 2. So listen to this, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on this. Verse 1. Wisdom found no place where she might dwell. Then a dwelling place was assigned her in the heavens. Wisdom went forth to make her dwelling among the children of men, and found no dwelling place. Wisdom returned to her place and took her seat amongst the angels. Okay, that's Book of Enoch 42, chapter 42, verses 1 and 2. So what do we learn about Lady Wisdom in these verses? Well, right out of the gate, we are told that Lady Wisdom found no place where she might dwell. And so a specific place was created for her. It then says that she left that specific place and went and wandered around amongst the children of men, where she found no place either. And so she returned back amongst the place in the heavens that had been created for her and those like her, which the book of Enoch refers to as being angels. So what are we to understand by the term angels here? I think that in the vernacular of the book of Enoch, the term angel is probably best understood as being somebody who is not mortal. So Lady Wisdom is different from the sons of men whom she wandered amongst, in that she's a spirit being and does not have a physical body. Now, when she wandered amongst the posterity of men, I believe that we are to presume that this is talking about this earth, because it is this earth about which Enoch writes in the book of Enoch. So that would be to say that Lady Wisdom came and wandered amongst the posterity of Adam and Eve, and she could get no foothold amongst them. Meaning, she may have tried to lead them astray, and they didn't want anything to do with her, and so she left. Those are the first two verses. Now, before we move on to verse 3, I want to just highlight some similarities here between Lady Wisdom essentially being removed from where she used to be in heaven to a new location. Because this is not without precedent. We read about something very similar in Revelation chapter 12. And I would like to read that to you because I think you'll find it highly relevant to the current conversation. I'm going to start by reading in Revelation chapter 12 with verse 7. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. This sounds very similar to the description about Lady Wisdom having no more place for her in heaven, and so she went to a secondary location. We learn that Satan and his angels were also cast out to a secondary location from heaven. And we learn about what that secondary location was in verses 9 and 12. Listen to this. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Therefore, rejoice ye heavens, and the inhabitor, and ye that dwell in them. And woe unto the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Okay, so in this verse, we understand that Satan was cast out to the earth, and that all of the inhabitants of the heavens rejoiced at the fact that Satan was banished to earth. Earth becomes Satan's prison planet. Furthermore, we learned that when Satan was banished to the earth, that all the other inhabitants of the heavens were rejoicing. They were totally psyched that Satan was now quarantined to planet Earth. However, those that drew the short straw to spend their mortality upon Satan's prison planet, they had great cause to mourn, because Satan, according to Revelation chapter 12, verse 12, had come upon the inhabitants of the earth having great wrath. So let's talk about this a little bit. Satan rebelled. There was a war in heaven. He tried to overthrow God and usurp the throne. And as a result, he was banished to the earth. We learned that Lady Wisdom, she was banished from heaven. It doesn't say anything about the war in heaven, but it also sounds like the place that she went to was not the earth. Because if you recall from the second verse that we read, she went and sojourned amongst the children of men. She couldn't get any hold there, and then she returned back to the place that she had been assigned. That was not where God the Father was. So she's from somewhere else. She's not on Satan's prison planet, at least she's not stuck there. It would appear from reading Revelations chapter 12 that Satan is stuck here. He can't leave. But apparently, the lady is free to come and go. That is very curious. It may explain, one of the reasons why she came to Earth. Maybe she wanted to check out Satan and all of, his angels, and maybe they were buds. Maybe she was saying, "Hey, Lucifer, how's it going? How do you feel about the choice you made?" Which maybe begs the question of why didn't she come down to earth with Satan? Why was she afforded some other location? And as I think about that, ponder that little conundrum, my mind goes to Proverbs 8, which is the verse or the chapter in the Old Testament that discusses Lady Wisdom. So let's read about Lady Wisdom in Proverbs chapter 8. Now, before we do, let me just give you a little background. Now, the Proverbs are attributed to King Solomon, who evidently was very wise. And why was he wise? Because the Lord asked him what he would like, and he said, I would like an understanding heart. And so the Lord blessed him with great wisdom. Now, despite Solomon's great secular wisdom, he apparently was pretty foolish when it came to spiritual matters. Now, why do I say that? Because despite the fact that he was a renowned king in Israel, he began to embrace the religious philosophies of the surrounding kingdoms. And this really started when he began taking wives from all of the adjacent kingdoms and allowing those wives to really practice some pagan religious beliefs. Foremost amongst these traditions, these religious traditions, was the worship of, guess who? The Queen of Heaven, aka Asherah. So King Solomon begins to permit the worship of Asherah, or the Queen of Heaven, throughout the kingdom of Israel. He begins actually planting groves. Asherah, she was worshipped in groves. They would craft trees, and they'd have things called Asherah poles that were reminiscent of the divine feminine, who was the fertility goddess, the goddess of love, and all kinds of, bogus stuff like that. But it became pervasive in Israel. And this is one of the reasons that the Lord told Solomon, listen, I am taking the kingdom from you. After you die, I'm removing the 10 tribes and you'll be left with the Jews. So that's what happened. So this is the context of Proverbs chapter 8. It's coming from King Solomon's perspective, religious tradition that has started to become corrupted. And this must have stemmed from some knowledge of the ancient world regarding Lady Wisdom. So you're going to find this pretty interesting. I'm going to start in verse 12, and then I'm going to jump over to 22 through 31. Listen to this. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and find out knowledge of witty inventions. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his ways, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth. When he established the clouds above, and when he strengthened the fountains of the deep. When he gave to the sea his decree that the waters should not pass, his commandment. When he appointed the foundations of the earth, then I was by him, as one brought up with him. And I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the habitable parts of this earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. Again, Proverbs chapter 8, verses 12, 22 through 31. That's some pretty interesting stuff. So Lady Wisdom is saying that she dwelt in prudence. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the word prudence and to dwell with prudence, prudence means cautious. So she is saying that she lived cautiously. Now, to me, in context of the other people that we know of that were cast out from heaven and there was no more space found for them there, Lucifer, he threw caution to the wind. He said, all right, I'm going for it. I want the throne of God. I want to be as the Most High. And that didn't go so well for him. He was cast down and banished and imprisoned to the earth. I think that what this is saying is that Lady Wisdom, she was cautious. She probably was well aware of Lucifer's intentions and said, no way, man. Are you kidding? Are you going to go against the God of heaven and you think you're going to win? How stupid are you, Lucifer? I am going to be a heck of a lot more prudent than you. But at the same time, there was place no more in heaven found for her either. So what does that mean? Well, I think that we can kind of read between the lines here to really a cryptic saying that Christ said more than once, referring to people that were mortals born upon this earth who it would have been better had they never been born. What does that mean? Well, I think that it may indicate that God the Father did not force spirits to come to mortality and be tested. I think that this was a plan that he proposed to his children that we could choose. We can choose to obey his commandments or we can choose not to. We have choice. Now, the fact that we existed prior to mortality is evident from Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. What happens in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5? Jeremiah is called to be a prophet in Israel. And the Lord tells Jeremiah something very curious. He says, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before he came forth out of the womb, he was sanctified to be a prophet to Israel. So what does that mean? It means that Jeremiah existed before he was born. Obviously, Jeremiah chose to come to the earth. Now, given that there was a war in heaven, there obviously were some disagreements with how mortality might play out. And it appears that Lucifer wanted to do things differently than God the Father wanted to do them. And so he rebelled and sought to overthrow the agency and will of God. To me, I'm speculating that Lady Wisdom said, okay, I know that I'm kind of a rascally person. By nature, I kind of do things that, aren't the best. My delights are with the children of men. I was raised in the presence of God, but I like messing around. This is essentially what she is saying in Proverbs. She said, listen, I existed before the world was created. And according to what the Lord told Jeremiah, so did Jeremiah. And given that there was a war in heaven, and there was Michael and his angels, and that they fought against Satan and his angels, obviously there were lots of us up there. And I believe that you and I and everyone on this planet, we were all there. And we listened to God's plan, and we listened to Lucifer's plan. And we sided with Lucifer. In fact, I believe that we fought with Michael to overthrow Lucifer and cast him down to this planet. And now we don't remember any of this because when we're born into mortality, the Lord, in his infinite wisdom, puts a veil of forgetfulness upon us so that we can't remember anything before this. And so we have to act by faith in this life. I think that perhaps when Lady Wisdom heard this plan, heard the two plans that were presented, Lucifer's plan compared to God's plan, and God's plan was obviously predicated upon his only begotten Son coming and atoning for the sins of the world, upon which we would have to believe and elect him as our Savior. And again, the Lord asked Job a very interesting question. Said, Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth and when all the sons of God shouted for joy and the morning stars sang together? I think that he's referring to the same period of time where when you refer to some of the ancient texts in the world, like the Enuma Elish, it's clear that the ancient religious traditions believed that there was originally a council in heaven prior to mortality where there were plans given. And, the Enuma Elish talks about a Satan-type figure that proposes a different plan than God as well. So this seems consistent with some of these ancient traditions that frankly predate the flood. So that is curious to me because clearly Adam and Eve would have had an understanding of the gospel. A lot of those things I think that we lost a lot of those pre-Diluvian records in the flood itself, but we have now translations of cuneiform tablets and things like that indicate, hey, this belief in a premortal council was widespread. There is a very interesting podcast out there. It's called The Ancient Tradition, where it's given by a lady that goes by the name of Jack Logan. I'm not sure if that's her real name or not, but she's a professor, and she goes through ancient documents trying to find and point out the original ancient tradition that all the ancient texts apostatized from. And it's fascinating. But she has come to the conclusion also that all of the ancient religions of the world originated from one original religion, and they just apostatized from it. And all of those ancient religions seem to indicate something like this happened. So I think, based off of what the Book of Enoch is saying here, that Lady Wisdom, she was cautious and she was concerned that if she came along with all of us down to mortality, that she wouldn't make it, that her rascally side would win over, and that frankly she would have been one of those of which Christ said, listen, it would have been better had you never been born. So she also, to me, it seems, thought Lucifer was crazy for rebelling. And I think she just opted, listen, I'm going to not choose plan A or B. I'm opting for C. And so God the Father created a separate kingdom for her and those like her that opted not to enter or risk mortality and screw up. So that's what I think that Lady Wisdom is saying here, or that the ancient tradition is teaching about Lady Wisdom, at least in Proverbs chapter 8. And I think that is very interesting. Now, that leads us to the third verse in the book of Enoch that I want to discuss that talks about Lady Wisdom. And this, in my opinion, is probably why Enoch spoke about Lady Wisdom in the first place. So this is from the 42nd chapter, 3rd verse of the book of Enoch. And unrighteousness went forth from her chambers, meaning Lady Wisdom was a doofus. Whom she sought not, she found, and dwelt with them, as rain in a desert and dew upon a thirsty land. So remember, in verse 2, it said that Lady Wisdom came amongst the seed of Adam and Eve, and they wanted nothing to do with her. And so she went back to her place, and then she started being rascally again. Unrighteousness went forth from her chambers, and whom she sought not, she found. Meaning, according to Proverbs chapter 8, she took her delights amongst the children of men. So she was seeking worlds inhabited by men. And this verse says that whom she was not seeking, she found. So to me, that means she found somebody that wasn't descendants of men. this is curious because according to Chris Bledsoe's account, his very strange, totally odd, weird account, where Lady Wisdom, or the lady as he refers to her, was always accompanied by these classical gray aliens, except for the fact that instead of being gray, they were jet black with glowing red eyes. Okay? That is not a description of a descendant of the children of men. It's someone else. So I think that Enoch may be saying, hey, Lady Wisdom, she delighted in the children of men, but she found someone else. And guess what? They loved her. They received her, and she dwelt with them as rain in a desert and dew upon a thirsty land. Now, something that I'm not sure if I mentioned or not in the last episode was that when the lady appeared to Chris, when the tree was on fire in his backyard out of that orb, that these black aliens with glowing red eyes came out from the tree line and bowed down and started worshiping her in front of Chris Bledsoe. So these people, or these entities, whatever you want to call them, they worship her. She is a deity to them. This sounds to me very consistent with the Book of Enoch's explanation of this. Now, something also that is kind of another data point, and again, friends, I'm not trying to convince you of any of this. Again, the purpose of this podcast is not to convince you of a dang thing. I just am convinced that if these things are true, they have to be able to be reconciled into the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that is the ultimate truth. So there has to be boxes for this kind of stuff. If it really exists, there has to be an explanation for it. And I think that this just may be that explanation. Now, again, the podcast name is Black Swan Rising Podcast, right? One of the telltale indicators of a black swan event is that it is undetectable by the masses in advance because of confirmation or normalcy bias. We think that things like this simply can't happen because we live in a normal world. Well, what if we do not live in a normal world? What if these things really are true? I mean, we have thousands of accounts of what I deem to be credible people that are talking about these kinds of creatures literally existing. And we have Chris Bledsoe talking about the lady. So how does this reconcile? Well, I think the Book of Enoch may be, giving us the key. And again, in the opening verse of the Book of Enoch, Enoch said, listen, I am writing this book not for my generation, but for the generation that will live in the last days when the watchers return. That's us. So this is, fascinating stuff, weird stuff, but it's pretty dang fascinating. I mean, you gotta admit. Now, let's go back to some of the ancient civilizations and what they taught about this lady, because again, the lady told Chris Bledsoe that every ancient civilization worshipped and venerated her. So the very first advanced civilization of which we know is also one of the strangest. It's the Sumerian civilization. And the Sumerian civilization is a total anomaly. Allegedly, civilizations at the dawn of time were supposed to be comprised of hunter-gatherers that, were barely above apes and could in no means perform advanced mathematical calculations, calculate the orbits of planets, the astronomical signs like solar eclipses and things like that. And yet the Sumerians, our translations of their cuneiform tablets indicate that they were highly advanced, and they come on the scene right at the dawn of civilization, right out of the gate. Now, according to the Book of Enoch, this happened because 200 men descended in the days of his father Jared upon the Mount Horeb and introduced technologies and knowledge that completely corrupted society. Now, Sumer would have had to been one of these civilizations. In fact, the Fertile Crescent is regarded as the cradle of civilization, and Sumer is the first major civilization within the Fertile Crescent, and it comes right out of the gate being highly advanced. I mean, they have, multi-story buildings, they have highly advanced agriculture, they've got clean water within the city, they've got aqueducts, they've got, amazing, trade and technology, compared to everywhere else in the world. And it's simply astounding. And it would remain that way. Sumer and the Sumerian educational system became the envy of the ancient world. I mean, the Chaldeans were essentially the keepers of the Sumerian knowledge. And the Babylonians rose to power because of the Chaldeans and their special knowledge. When David and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, when they were kidnapped by the king of Solomon, or not king of Solomon, what am I talking about? King of Babylon, they were taken to Babylon because of their propensity. They were smart kids. They were the whiz kids. And the Babylonians believed that they had what it took to be able to be taught after all of the knowledge of the Sumerians. And so the Sumerians left a major imprint on the world. So what do we learn about this, Lady Wisdom from the Sumerian texts? Well, the Sumerians referred to Lady Wisdom as Ianna. So let's listen to some translations of some of these cuneiform tablets that speak of Ianna. They're pretty interesting. Listen to this one. The people of Sumer parade before you. The male prostitutes comb their hair before you. They decorate the napes of their necks with colored scarfs. The women adorn their right side with men's clothing. The men adorn their left side with women's clothing. The ascending Pergara priests raise their swords before you. That is very interesting. It sounds like Ianna was a very promiscuous deity, and in fact, she was. One of the ways that you worshipped Ianna was through ritualistic sacred prostitution. Here's another excerpt from a Sumerian tablet that speaks about Ianna. To destroy, to create, to tear out, to establish are yours, Ianna. To turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man are yours, Ianna. Very interesting. This sounds like something right out of modern times. According to these ancient texts we are talking, these are some of the very first things ever written by mankind. They're talking about something right out of a gay pride festival kind of a scenario here. Something that you would, hear from the transgender story hour, kind of crazy stuff. Now, whatever you think of this, one thing is for certain, it doesn't seem to reconcile with traditional Christianity or Judeo-Christian values as taught by the Bible. So it seems a little wild. Okay. Now, the other ancient civilizations had similar belief systems. When you read from Herodotus, who was an ancient Greek historian, he claimed that every Babylonian woman had to prostitute herself at least once in her life at the temple of Ishtar. Now, Ishtar is the Babylonian name for Ianna. Also, the Canaanite name for Ianna and Ishtar is Asherah. And the Canaanites believed exactly the same thing. You worshipped Asherah through sexual promiscuity. You had sacred sexual relationships with ritual prostitutes as part of the worship of Asherah, the queen of heaven, the goddess of love and fertility. And we Understand, therefore, that one of the telltale signs of this divine feminine goddess, in antiquity at least, is that she takes the profane and makes it sacred. Performing these, I don't know how you say that, fornication, doing these kinds of things outside of the marriage covenant falls outside of Judeo-Christian teachings. There is absolutely no question about that. So this is at odds. And it's very curious how you see these same kinds of philosophies becoming mainstream today. Not just, sexual promiscuity, but really gender fluidity. And in fact, when you look at this ancient feminine goddess, you often see her depicted with a beard or wearing men's clothing, as if she were gender fluid herself. And now you see these exact same things in our societies today, and I have a very hard time believing that this is coincidental when she is now appearing to the likes of Chris Bledsoe, saying that the world is at the point of entering into a whole new period of the divine feminine, when she will essentially be restored in all of her ancient glory. That is concerning to me, because when you look at the influence that Asherah, this queen of heaven, had upon ancient Israel, friends, it was not good. Okay, let me just give you some examples from the Bible. Let's flip on over to 1 Kings. A great resource for studying the Old Testament is BibleHub.com. It provides multiple different translations of the same verse. I really enjoy looking at how different scholars translated different Hebrew words. It brings some extra clarity. I'm going to be using, for 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 15, I'm going to use the New Living Translation, and this is what it says. Then the Lord will shake Israel like a reed whipped about in a stream. He will uproot the people of Israel from this good land that he gave their ancestors, and will scatter them beyond the Euphrates River, for they have angered the Lord with the Asherah poles that they have set up for worship. So what is this? This is talking about the northern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom of Israel was worshiping Asherah and Baal. And they were doing this for a long time. And finally, the Lord was fed up with it because Asherah worship had become so prevalent throughout the society that he said, okay, it's over. And he brought in Assyria and they wiped them out. So worshiping Asherah was not a good idea. We read this again in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 33. I'm going to use the English Standard Version of the Bible for this one. And Ahab made an Asherah, meaning he made either an idol or an Asherah pole. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. Why? Because he and his wife Jezebel really pushed Israel over the top into this Asherah worship and corrupted the entire society. So again, worshiping Asherah, worshiping the Queen of Heaven, not good. Let me give you another example. This is from 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 10, and I'm using the New Living Translation. They, meaning Israel, set up sacred pillars and Asherah poles at the top of every hill and under every green tree. Now, every is a very large percentage, so this was very widespread throughout Israel to the point that the Lord said, okay, enough. Now, just so you know that this was not confined just to the northern kingdom of Israel, let's read a passage from 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 7, and this is talking about the kingdom of Judah. Again, I'm going to use the New Living Translation. Manasseh even made a carved image of Asherah and set it up in the temple, the very place where the Lord had told David and his son Solomon, my name will be honored forever in this temple and in Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen from among all the tribes of Israel. So Manasseh, he's the wicked king of Judah that actually killed Isaiah by stuffing him into a log and having the log sawn asunder. He went off the deep end, and brought a carved image of Asherah into, I believe, the Holy of Holies, which was, of course, ridiculous and, a sign that Israel had totally lost its way. And in fact, if you look at the prophecies of Jeremiah, the primary reason that the Lord gives through Jeremiah to Jerusalem for the fact that Babylon is coming in and wiping them out is because they are following in the footsteps of the northern kingdom of Israel and worshiping Asherah. Let me give you some examples. Okay, this example comes from Jeremiah chapter 7, and I'm going to start in verse 12. But go ye now unto the place which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people Israel. So what is Shiloh? Shiloh is the city in the northern kingdom of Israel where the tabernacle of the congregation was set up. And the Lord is saying to the Jews in Jerusalem, go and check out and see if that tabernacle is still there. It's not. Why isn't it there? Because I wiped those people out because they were worshiping Asherah. Now, let's continue in verses 13 and 14. Now, because ye have done all these works, saith the Lord, and I spake unto you, rising up early, and speaking, but ye heard not. And I called you, but you answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house, which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave unto you, to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. So what is the Lord saying here? He's saying, listen, guys, because you are worshiping Asherah, the queen of heaven, just like the northern kingdom of Israel did, I am going to do to the temple of Solomon what I did to the tabernacle of the congregation. I'm going to have it destroyed. Now, the Jews, there's no way that they believed that the Lord would destroy his own house. But that is exactly what happened. Let's flip down to verse 17 and continue reading from there. Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead the dough, and make the cakes to the queen of heaven, who is Asherah, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. Do they provoke me to anger, saith the Lord? Do they not provoke themselves to the confusion of their own faces? Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, Behold, mine anger and my fury shall be poured out upon this place, upon man and upon beast and upon the trees of the field and upon the fruit of the ground, and it shall burn, and it shall not be quenched. Why did the Lord destroy Jerusalem and the kingdom of Judah? Because they were worshiping the queen of heaven, Asherah, and other gods. So the Lord made good on this. The king of Babylon came in and wiped out Jerusalem and took many people captive, and the Temple of Solomon was destroyed. Now, there was a fairly large contingent of Jews that had actually relocated to Egypt. So the Lord sent Jeremiah over to Egypt to call those folks to repentance because they had started to worship Asherah as well. So in chapter 44, Jeremiah basically goes over there and says, guys, don't you see what happened to the Jews in Jerusalem? They're gone. Have you seen the temple? It's destroyed. Why? Because they were worshiping Asherah. You need to knock this off, or the same thing's going to happen to you. But the Jews didn't want to have anything to do with that. In fact, their response is, frankly, kind of shocking. Listen to this. This is in Jeremiah chapter 44, verse 16. As for the words that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of the Lord, we will not hearken unto thee, but we will certainly do whatever so thing cometh forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the queen of heaven, and to pour out our drink offerings unto her, as we have done, and as our fathers, and as our kings, and as our princes, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals, and we were well, and we saw no evil. But since we left off burning incense to the queen of heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted in all things, and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine. And when we burned incense to the queen of heaven, and poured out our drink offerings unto her, did we make her cakes and worship her, and pour out our drink offerings unto her without our men? So clearly, the Jews had become very brazen in their worship of Asherah, the queen of heaven. They said, hey, we're not going to stop. In fact, we think every time we stop doing this, that's when, we get in trouble. So go pound sand, Jeremiah. Go tell the Lord to pound sand. We're not worshiping him. We are Asherah's folks now. And so, as you might imagine, the same thing happened to them as happened to the other Jews in Jerusalem, as well as the other tribes of Israel that were carried off away by Assyria. So, worshiping Asherah, the queen of heaven, or heavenly mother, sometimes as she is called in some of the ancient religions, has never been a good thing. So when the lady is coming to Chris Bledsoe and saying, yeah, the world is about to enter into the stage of the divine feminine and it is going to be awesome, you know that it is not going to be awesome. This was not awesome for Israel in antiquity, and it will not be awesome for us in our day if we get swept away by this. Now, it's interesting to note that the Jews, when they were in Babylon, they kind of, had a, come to Jehovah kind of a moment. And they said, listen, we got to get this polytheism out of our scriptures. And so they went through and they edited their scriptures. Any reference to a father and a son was eliminated from the scriptures. And that kind of introduced all kinds of stumbling blocks, made it very difficult for the Jews 600 years later when Christ came to accept him. But that was, the Jews are pretty much famous for building a hedge around the law, trying to protect it. But the reason that they were doing this was because their ancestors went head over heels over Asherah. And the reason why I'm talking about all of this stuff is because it didn't stop with ancient Israel or the ancient world. In fact, it never stopped. It just kind of changed forms. And we see it right out of the gate, the dawn of Christianity, amongst the Gnostics. Now, the Gnostics they're kind of weird, but they incorporated into their version of Christianity the worship of Lady Wisdom, or Sophia, as I've already mentioned. And according to their doctrine, Lady Sophia was actually the sister of Jesus Christ, meaning she was the daughter of God the Father, and Jesus Christ was the son of God the Father. And so the worship of Lady Wisdom was very prominent amongst the Gnostics. Now, you don't see this in early Christianity for some time. However, it does start rearing its ugly head within the Catholic Church. Hundreds of years after the dawn of Christianity, you have these Marian apparitions begin to appear, where the lady appears to different folks and starts introducing extra biblical practices that are, frankly, very bizarre. And one of those examples happened in 1208, when the lady appeared to Saint Dominic and introduced what is known as the rosary today. The rosary is comprised of approximately 71 different prayers. Of those 71 different prayers, most of them are prayers to Mary, 55 of them. Those that are not prayers to Mary are, just reciting the Lord's Prayer. But the vast majority of the rosary itself are prayers to the lady. And when the lady appeared to Saint Dominic, she said, listen, I'm giving you this special rosary as a way for you to fight heresy, because heresy is going to start, creeping up in the church. Well, fighting heresy with heresy has never been effective. But that's not the only thing. Right around this same period of time, about actually 18 years later, you have the lady appear to the Knights of the Teutonic Order, specifically to a man by the name of Hubertus Cook, who was in Jerusalem, and they had just been trying to liberate the Holy Land from the Moors, the Saracens, and it was very bloody, and they had finally had enough, and they were going to go home. So they decided that they wanted to travel home by way of Assyria, because they wanted specifically to go through Nineveh to see where the lost tribes of Israel had been taken in captivity. And he specifically, and the knights that were with him, had a very peculiar experience that happened to them while they were in Nineveh. At nighttime, they said that a young woman who was very beautiful appeared to them and told them that she had a message for them and that she was going to give the message to them 5 years from that anniversary in a mountain in Germany. And that, at the time, that mountain was known as Udersberg, but now it's known as Ettenberg. Now, Ettenberg is a famous mountain because that is the mountain that Hitler oriented his mountain home to put this big, majestic view of Mount Ettenberg in his windows. And there is a very interesting reason for that. What's that reason? Well, we learned this from a cache of documents that a German reporter who was living at London received out of the blue. His name was Ralph Edel. In 1992, he receives these boxes that are labeled 5892 to Sargon, and that's it. And he opens up the boxes, and they are filled with Nazi propaganda. And not only that, but they contain all kinds of photographs of key Nazi members, including Hitler, in very intimate settings, doing some very strange occultic things. And the boxes contain all kinds of purportedly ancient documents, including a very strange encounter with the lady on Mount Ettenberg, which was in answer to this visitation that Hubertus Cook had in Nineveh. Now, this report has become known as the First Roderick Report. Now, all of the documents, everything that was included in these boxes, is considered to be radioactive toxic in Germany today. Because according to the German Criminal Code, Section 130, you cannot talk about anything that might legitimize or glorify or accentuate any sort of Nazi-related philosophies. And this box essentially was filled with it. It was the occultic history that the Nazi Party pointed to as the reason for their existence. And surprisingly, the lady is front and center in the rise of this Nazi Party. And you read this in this First Roderick Report, which, according to Ralph Edel, and I had this confirmed to me by a museum in Berlin. This information was published in a German newspaper that went on to become the state-sponsored paper of the Nazi Party. All of these documents were published in 1920, kind of as a way to prepare the way for the rise of the Aryan movement. But they were all destroyed post-war, and it became illegal to even talk about any of these things until Ralph Edel receives this box, and then there is renewed interest in some of these documents. Now, I am going to read to you this First Roderick Report, not because I think that you should believe this, but because it is clear that the Nazis believed it. Now, allegedly, the background for this report is that a group of the Knights of the Teutonic Order went up into the mountain on the 5th year anniversary looking for this lady because she said that she was going to meet them. And they found the ruins of what appeared to be an old temple on that mountain. And they went inside of that temple, and lo and behold, they saw the lady. And this is their account. The apparition of the lady was like a structure entirely of light and gold and wafer-thin fabric of green shimmering glass. which formed the tall figure of a woman, whose translucent body was of flexible slenderness and appeared as a miraculous being, half woman and half girl, whom undoubtedly could not be of this world. And as the glistening glow receded again, this sounds very much like the lady who came out of the orb in Chris Bledsoe's backyard. So as the glistening glow receded again, it was as if it formed that woman's body more firmly, with all its accumulating light. And soon, clearly visible, she was dressed in a long robe made entirely of small golden leaves, in an elongated shape. Her fair countenance was thin and pale and utterly wonderful. Her eyes, hair, and the nails of her fingers had luster and color of brown amber. A golden headband held back the quantities of her hair, which reached very long down to the ground. And on top of the headband was a golden crescent, the tips of which were bent like horns, and in the midst of it was a likewise golden sun. Her superhuman eyes looked at us, and her lips seemed to glow. It was the most beautiful picture a man has ever seen. She herself was translucent and of a non-human nature. And yet we were not frightened or afraid of her. And as her figure became more and more solid, and soon no longer translucent, but almost as if touchable, and stood close to us, there went out of her a warmth that swelled in us. She took 2 steps towards us, and her hair flowed down around her, and her mouth smiled, and her eyes looked with kindness. But all the light in the grotto, which once was a temple, came entirely from it. But there was no question in us, and no one opened their mouths, and we knew that she was not a devil, and that only good had to be with her. And when her body came very tangible, she said to us, and her voice sounded bright and mild, "I called you without you knowing. You came without the place being known to you. For here and this night ye shall see and notice what will one day have its value." Now that her word had broken a spell, I also spoke and asked her who she was. She immediately answered, "I am Isa, or Ishtar. The people who once remembered me here in this place called me Asherah," who, of course, was the Canaanite goddess known and worshipped as the Queen of Heaven. "The people of the north, who were your ancestors, called me Idun." And so every nation gave me the name after its own language. But we marveled at her, and she smiled. Then Emerant said, "We were faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ, and that we would never worship any other deity, even if she was beauty herself." Then Ishtar looked almost in the manner of women, and seemed to find the saying of my brother funny. A small shiver ran through my soul. "I heard your prayers to him, the divine brother, but he is in his kingdom, and therefore in himself. But I, the divine sister, am here again, for a little while. For Yahweh, who is Satan, finally defeats the female power." And Ishtar took 3 more easy steps towards us, and now she stood very close to us. And the indescribable things that emanated from her were of great power, and could not be described at all. And in her belt there was a blue feather, an inkwell. And she now pulled out, and she held it in her right hand. But then the pen became a dagger, and Ishtar said to us, "Just as the gentle pen turns into a dagger in a moment, the deity of love will change into the goddess of war, when the moment will have come to strike Satan." Ishtar now turned the dagger in her dainty hand, and it immediately became the little blue feather, which she gave herself again in the amber golden belt, and then continued, "You and yours are the most seeking among the people of this world. Therefore you shall find. So first of all, I instruct you, not far from this place, to seek an ancient stone bearing the mark of my divinity and the sign of the greeting hand. Under this stone you will find what you have come to seek, and this will tell you, once again, my message to you, and will give it to you again from the legacy of the divine brother, which is in truth different from what you think you know, in many things," meaning that they were going to find the true gospel of Jesus Christ hidden under some stone. She now went to the stone stump of a broken pedestal to sit down on it in a sitting position, and parts of her amber hair spread in waves on the ground, and where it touched the ground, its rock began to glow, so that it became quite bright all around. At a sign the goddess gave us with one hand, we all sat down to listen to the words, and she continued, "What you should know and notice above all is this. Once upon a time, through me and in me, the Godhead determined that the people of Babylon, who were excellent and stood above all those times in clarity of nature, to create the kingdom of truth. and they built well upon it. And Nebuchadnezzar finally destroyed Yahweh's shrine of hell, meaning the Temple of Solomon. And yet, the great city, which should have become the center of the earth and the light for all people, did not prevail. The new city, in the ruins of which you now see me, was even less successful. This was why he, the divine brother, to whom you pray, appointed yet another people to do the great work, the people most similar to that of Babylon, the people of the Germans, to which also belong the Franks, who have meanwhile adopted another language and therefore erroneously see themselves as a separate people. And you shall found a new city with your faithful community, the place of which I will designate to you. This new city of yours shall become the northern capital of the kingdom, while a southern one also shall have it, which already is, Vienna. And this will never again be extinguished. Even if one center perishes, it will always have the second. For that a new kingdom will be the last torch of divine light called to illuminate the world. And the time will have come when the constellation of the water jug will come to stand above the earth with the magical water of life, which can extinguish the hellish embers of Yahweh forever. For where it may be necessary to fight, the Godhead, with a weapon that will be that new kingdom of light, will force victory no matter how many enemies there may be. But the Godhead can only lend the powers to bright aims, and could not, even if they wanted to, wield the weapons of darkness, which is why the coming new kingdom of light, which is commanded by the divine brother, may take the sword alone in the light of truth. But I will be with the heirs of my Babylon forever. Now the goddess rose again from the seat and walked towards the entrance of the grotto and said, So will I now describe to you, and describe exactly, the place where you are to secretly build up a temple and lay down all your knowledge there. This is what I have just told you, and some of what you will hear and find. Above the temple, let the new city, Berlin, be built. All right, that's a pretty interesting account. Whether you believe it or not is really not as relevant as the fact that this was included in some boxes that was attributed to the rise of the Nazi religious movement, which frankly was a massive movement. I mean, in Germany, the Nazi Party actually rewrote the Bible based off of the new religious information that the Knights of the Teutonic Order obtained. I mean, the Knights of the Teutonic Order were very influential throughout Nazism. I mean, you look at the highest award that you could get as a Nazi soldier was the Cross of the Iron Cross, which is the emblem that was on the uniforms of the Knights of the Teutonic Order. Of course, we already mentioned that Hitler's home overlooked the mountain where this apparition allegedly occurred, and his home was filled with relics of the Knights of the Teutonic Order. So whether you believe this or not, it would appear that the more occultish aspects of the Nazi Party did give this credence. So what does this lady talk about? Well, right out of the gate, her apparition mirrors the apparition of the lady to Chris Bledsoe in his backyard in North Carolina, except for there is no reference to black, red-eyed aliens. Now, this lady comes out and tells these men that she is the divine sister, which is curiously exactly what the Gnostics taught about her. She also kind of flips the biblical narrative, saying, listen, you don't understand the true narrative here. The Jews, they're actually the bad guys. Yahweh, yeah, he's actually the bad guy. The Temple of Solomon, yeah, that was the hell shrine. You know who the good guys were? Babylon, the guys that came in and wiped all that stuff out. Is it any mystery then that if the Nazis really did believe this, that they would go through and look at the Jews as inferior to them, and not only inferior, but enemies of the true Enlightenment, and therefore they were okay to wipe out with the final solution? Is kind of ludicrous stuff. As I mentioned, the Nazis actually retranslated the Bible, wherein Jesus Christ was not Jew, but came in as a Aryan, I believe they said he was an Assyrian that came in and tried to save the day, but that the Jews rejected and crucified him. Another very interesting thing is, of course, that this lady says that Berlin will be the capital and that there's another capital, Vienna, and that in a coming day, the epic of the water jug will pour out upon the earth, bringing new enlightenment. Well, that plays hand in glove with what the lady told Chris Bledsoe would transpire when the red star of Regulus rises at dawn in the view of the Sphinx, which, if you listen to Chris Bledsoe, he said when he explained this to NASA, they went through and did the calculations on it and said, well, this correlates with Easter Sunday, 2026. So the lady said that this would usher in a new age of knowledge and understanding, which is what she was implying to the Knights of the Teutonic Order with the whole water jug, which is, the equivalent of saying that we are entering into the age of the Aquarius, which, I don't pretend to understand or subscribe to any of that stuff. But I do know that there are lots of people that are contending that the age of Aquarius is upon us, blah, 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 blah. All I know is that you have different accounts where the lady is referring that something like this is about to happen and that it's about to happen fairly soon, Easter of this coming year. So that is, really quite interesting and gives you something to think about. Now, after this, you start seeing the phenomenon of Marian apparitions accelerate. You have one of the most famous Marian apparitions of all time take place in Mexico with Our Lady of Guadalupe, where allegedly she appears to, I think the guy's name was Juan Diego, something like that, and asks for a church to be built in her name. And Juan Diego goes and tells the priests, and they don't believe him. So the lady then appears to Juan Diego and his uncle and causes an image of her to magically show up on Juan Diego's tunic. And that tunic is now 500 years old and is on display in the church that has been built in the lady's honor. And, ever since she has been known in that area of the world as Our Lady of Guadalupe. Interestingly, the tunic, which is 500 years old, is said to not have deteriorated at all and remains on display in that church. So that's curious. But if you were to go and look at, in Wikipedia, for instance, and just search Marian apparitions, you will be shocked at how many of these things are happening. And when you dig into these, you're left scratching your head going, what in the flip is going on here? Is everybody lying? Because some of these, there are literally thousands of people that are witnessing some of these. Perhaps one of the most famous of all the Marian apparitions out there is Our Lady of Fatima. And, that occurred, I want to say around 1919 in Fatima, Portugal. And it's kind of a crazy story. I mean, the lady, she appeared to these shepherd children and gave them these prophecies, and, it began to spread like wildfire. And, a lot of people were saying, no, this isn't true. This isn't true. Of course, every time that this lady appears, she's always talking about herself, and she's always introducing new prayers that should be said to her. She's introducing concepts of medallions with her image on it. She's requesting churches to be built in her name. This is really interesting because in the New Testament specifically, Christ came out and said, listen, If I bear testimony of myself, my testimony is not true. And yet that is all that this lady appears to be doing. She's bearing testimony of herself, which is very bizarre. And to me, it raises some red flags. But let me tell you a little more about this Marian apparition in Fatima, Portugal, because it has some particular relevance to this account. So these children were being persecuted because, people were saying that they were lying. And eventually the lady tells them, listen, I am going to appear in the town square on such and such date. You go and you let everybody know, and they can come and see for themselves. And so these shepherd children go and tell the town, and this spreads like wildfire through Portugal. And on the day of the event, the town square is packed. I mean, there are tens of thousands of people. People came on a pilgrimage from all over the world to be present when the lady appeared. And there is a really interesting account of this given by a secular scientist who was present. And I want to read you that account so that you understand, what this was like, because this was covered in the news in the day. I mean, I think they've done a motion picture on this. It's a pretty weird thing to have happened. So listen to this account. So this man's name is Dr. Jose Maria de Almeida Garret, and he was a science professor at Coimbra University in Portugal. These are his words. I was looking at a spot of the apparitions. There were some wisps of smoke that were appearing, and the crowd was looking at them and wondering what the heck they were. In a serene, if cold, expectation of something happening, and with diminishing curiosity, because a long time had passed without anything to excite my attention. The sun, a few moments before, had broken through the thick layer of clouds which hid it and now shone clearly and intensely. Suddenly, I heard the uproar of thousands of voices, and I saw the whole multitude spread out in a vast space at my feet, turn with their backs to that spot where until then all of their expectations had been focused, and looked at the sun on the other side. I turned around too, towards the point commanding their gaze, and I could see the sun, like a very clear disk with its sharp edge, which gleamed without hurting the sight. It could not be confused with the sun seen through a fog, for it was neither veiled nor dim. At Fatima, it kept its light and heat and stood out clearly in the sky with a sharp edge, like a large gaming table. The most astonishing thing was to be able to stare at the solar disk for a long time, brilliant with light and heat, without hurting the eyes or damaging the retinas. During this time, the sun's disk did not remain immobile. It had a giddy motion, but not like the twinkling of a star in its brilliance, for it spun around upon itself in a mad whirl. During the solar phenomenon, which I have just described, there were also changes of color in the atmosphere. Looking at the sun, I noticed that everyone was becoming darkened. I looked first at the nearest objects and then extended my glance further afield as far as the horizon. I saw everything had assumed an amethyst color. Objects around me, the sky, the atmosphere, were of the same color. Everything both near and far had changed, taking on the color of old yellow damask. People looked as if they were suffering from jaundice, and I recall a sensation of amusement as seeing them look so ugly and unattractive. My own hand was the same color. Then suddenly, one heard a clamor, a cry of anguish breaking from all the people. The sun, whirling wildly, seemed all at once to loosen itself from the firmament, and, blood red, advanced threateningly upon the earth, as if to crush us with its huge and fiery weight. The sensation during those moments was truly terrible. All the phenomena which I have described were observed by me in a calm and serene state of mind, without any emotional disturbance. It is for others to interpret and explain them. Finally, I must declare that never before or after October 13th, 1917, have I observed similar atmospheric or solar phenomena. There you have it. To me, what stands out is the similarity between this object that the people at Fatima were seeing and the sun-like object that appeared in the night sky above Nuremberg, Germany, as described by Hans Glacier in his article that we reviewed in a prior episode. In that episode, the Nuremberg celestial phenomenon, there were all kinds of orbs and cylinders that were fighting in the sky. And the sun in that instance could not have been the sun, because the sun should not have been rising in the sky, certainly to the height that it was at 4:30 in the morning on an April morning. So curiously, you have another similar object that appeared at Fatima and was moving all over the place. And again, reminds me of the giant orb that Chris Bledsoe saw near the Cape Fear River in North Carolina, which he also thought was the sun at one point. So these things are very curious. And if these things are true, and clearly all of these people that witnessed this were not simply making it up. I mean, you can say that and use that as your excuse to just write this whole thing off. But to me, that is a radical cop-out. You can go on, again, look up all these Marian apparitions that have taken place. I mean, you've got videos where tens of thousands of people are recording these kinds of events. I mean, there have been numerous Marian apparitions in Egypt atop of these, churches, Egyptian Orthodox churches, that are inexplicable, where you have someone matching the lady's description, according to Chris Bledsoe, and frankly, the same description as is in the Knights of this first Roderick report, as given by the Knights of the Teutonic Order. And it is bizarre. It is truly bizarre. Because, and I don't want to offend any of our Catholic friends out there, but nowhere in the Bible are we ever told that we should worship or venerate anyone other than God the Father. Jesus Christ always pointed us to the Father. He prayed to the Father. He never prayed to his mother or to any other person to intercede on his behalf. And the scriptures are very clear that Christ is the intermediary between us and the Father and no other. And yet this woman has interjected herself in a totally extra-biblical manner and seems to make the emphasis on her. Now, the reasons for this are not clear to me, but it is very curious, the similarities between Marian adoration today and the adoration of Asherah in antiquity. Let me give you an example of this. I'm going to read to you a prayer to Asherah, and then I am going to read to you a prayer to the Virgin Mary. And I'm going to let you decide how similar these are. Listen to this. Asherah, Queen of Heaven, hear our prayers. Shine your radiant grace to us, your children. May we never forget the compassion and the love that you have shown to us. You have dried the tears from my eyes and held me in your arms as a mother and child. In your eternal embrace, my soul has been found. Okay. Now, this next one is a prayer to the Virgin Mary from the St. Pius X Catholic School Center. It's on their website, and it's a prayer teaching children how they should pray. Listen to this. I greet you, ever blessed Virgin, Mother of God, refuge of sinners and Queen of the universe. Most loving Mother, attracted by your beauty, sweetness, and tender compassion, I confidently turn to you and beg of you to obtain for me of your dear Son the favor I request in this novena. Mention your request here. Obtain for me also, Queen of Heaven and Earth, the most lively contrition for the many sins that I have committed, and grace to imitate closely those virtues which you practice so faithfully, especially humility, purity, and obedience. Above all, I beg you to be my mother and protectress, to receive me into the number of your devoted children, and to guide me from your high throne of glory. Do not reject my petition, Mother of Mercy. Have pity on me, and do not abandon me during life or at the moment of my death. Accept this offering, sweet Queen of heaven and earth, and obtain for me from your dear Son, Jesus Christ, the favors I ask through your intercession in this novena. Obtain for me also generous, constant love of God, perfect submission to his holy will, the true spirit of a Christian, and the grace of final perseverance. Amen. So obviously these two prayers are very similar. Both are referred to as the Queen of Heaven. Both are prayed to intercede on the behalf of God's children here on earth, and both seemingly are taking the place of God. That is a disturbing similarity to me. And I don't think that similarity is happenstance. I think that you may see Christianity being hijacked here by a very ancient entity. So this is something that I think we should all, think about, because, if Chris Bledsoe is correct, and I sure hope that he is not, then something bizarre and confusing is about to take place. And all of these little signs that have happened from the dawning of time, as recorded from the book of Enoch all the way through to modern times, seem to be pointing to a great deception. And to me, it sounds like a massive black swan event. Could you imagine what would happen if the lady does appear on some global scale and starts teaching things that are not true? You have over the vast majority of Christians today are affiliated with the Catholic Church, over 1 billion Catholics today. These billion Catholics are venerating the lady. So you could see how this could really go south rather quickly. So I want to close this episode by reading something out of an apocryphal book called The Ascension of Isaiah. Now, The Ascension of Isaiah is a document that is attributed to Isaiah, but it was commonplace throughout the ancient church. I mean, you look at first century AD, and the Ascension of Isaiah is everywhere. So this is several hundred years before the formal creation of the Roman Catholic Church. So its origins are very curious. And the reason that I want to share it with you will become very apparent in a moment. It speaks of a coming Antichrist. Now, I want you to listen to this in the context of what we have just learned about the lady in this episode, as well as the experiences of Chris Bledsoe. I will start by reading from chapter 4, verse 1. And now Hezekiah and Josab, my son, these are the days of the completion of the world. After it is consummated, Beliar, the great ruler and king of this world, will descend, who hath ruled it since it came into being. Yea, he will descend from his firmament in the likeness of a man, a lawless king, the slayer of his mother. Now, let's just pause here. So, Beliar is a name that is referred to in the Dead Sea Scrolls and refers to the Antichrist. And in this instance, in this document, it is referring to an Antichrist who ruled the world in the beginning and came to it from his own firmament, meaning he came to this world from somewhere else. And this isn't Satan, because it says that he killed his own mother. And, Satan didn't kill his mother. So this is referring to an Antichrist that's coming here from somewhere, that is not Earth. To me, in the context of the book of Enoch, this would be a watcher, okay? And again, the book of Enoch said that watchers would return in the last days. So now I'm gonna pick up in verse 3. And this king will persecute the plant which the 12 apostles of the beloved have planted. Of the 12, meaning of the original 12 apostles, one will be delivered into his hands. That's curious. Verse 4. This ruler in the form of a king will come, and there will come, and out there will come with him all the powers of this world. And they will hearken unto him in all that he desires. And at his word, now this is very interesting, the sun will rise at night, and he will make the moon to appear at the 6th hour. Okay. This sounds very similar to the miracle at Fatima, when you have an orb appearing like the sun that is clearly not the sun, because the sun would not dance around and then charge the inhabitants of the earth as if it were going to kill them. It also sounds like the Nuremberg celestial phenomenon, where you had a sun-like object out of which other crafts were coming and then battling in the sky above Nuremberg, Germany in the 1500s. So this is very curious to me. We're talking orbs. And this man is using these orbs as a sign and a wonder, and it is shocking and convincing many people. Now in verse 6, and all that he hath desired he will do in the world. He will do and speak like the beloved, and he will say, I am God, and before me there has been none. And all the people in the world will believe in him, and they will sacrifice to him, and they will serve him, saying, This is God, and besides him there is no other. And they have great number of those that have been associated together in order to receive the beloved. He will turn aside after him, meaning most of Christianity is going to be deceived by this guy and follow him as if he is the Son of God. And there will be power in his miracles in every city and region. And he will set up his image before him in every city. And he shall bear sway 3 years and 7 months and 27 days. And many believers and saints, having seen him, for whom they were hoping, who was crucified, Jesus Christ the Lord, after that Isaiah had seen him who was crucified and ascended. And those also were believers in him. And of those, few in those days will be left as his servants. That, friends, is terrifying. So according to this ancient document, and nobody really knows where this came from. Now, is it possible that one of the early apostles had a vision, just like Peter had a vision where, you had the blanket of unclean things from the law of Moses come down in front of him, and he saw all of those things, but this somehow didn't make it into the scriptures because it's weird? I don't know. I don't believe for a second that every letter or teaching of the early apostles made it into the New Testament. Frankly, we don't have very much in the New Testament by way of the original 12 apostles at all, but clearly they were teaching. So I don't know. I don't know what the origin, maybe this thing is entirely fake. All I know is that there are some highly unusual correlations between this document and some very weird and bizarre things that have been taking place. And in my experience, I am hesitant to dismiss patterns that are so obvious throughout time. So to this end, friends, as I'm thinking about this stuff myself, I worry what would happen if you had Asherah, the Queen of Heaven, do some miraculous apparition where the world sees her and she introduces us to her son, which happens to be this fellow. And then he starts doing all of these crazy miracles and wonders that cause Christians everywhere to be dumbfounded and to lose their faith. To me, this would be incredibly tragic. And as a result, I am going to spend the next episode talking about what the scriptures do say about this coming Antichrist. And Friends, you're going to want to tune in because there is a lot about this guy, and none of it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. So buckle up, friends, and know the God that you worship. Know what the Holy Ghost feels like. You need to be led and taught by the Holy Ghost. There are going to be things that happen that your eyes are going to be deceiving you. It's just like, right now you have to really scratch your head sometimes when you're watching a video because you don't know if it's faked or not. This is going to be real, but it's also going to be a lie. And you're going to need to be led by the Holy Ghost. All of us are. We are going to need to help one another. This is where it's going to become vital for us to put away all of our differences, different Christian sects, and stop, pointing the finger and condemning each other because we believe differently one from the other, and start helping one another retain the faith that we have in Jesus Christ. Because if any of this is true, things are about to get super dicey, and we are going to need one another's help. We're going to need to be able to discern truth from error. So friends, it is more important than ever that we engage in our own spiritual education, that we seek for instruction from the Lord, and that we strive to stand in holy places and to increase the amount of light and knowledge in our lives so that it will be more difficult for us to be deceived in the coming days. All right, friends, that's it for this episode. Keep seeking, for they that seek shall find.
You have just finished an episode of the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production, hosted by Michael B. Rush. For show notes, transcriptions, and extras, please visit www.theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, click the share button icon and send it to your friends and family. This will help to ensure the continued publication of future content. Michael thanks you in advance for sharing and looks forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep seeking, for they that seek shall find.